Hello everybody and welcome back to the Reborn 13 podcast, Genie Out of the Bottle, episode 6. And today, I am excited to say the least, because we have got a very, very interesting podcast coming up. Now, you may have guessed, or you may be able to see by the title of this video, we are going to be running through a very interesting document, a very mind-blowing document, if you could describe something as such, because this will have the potential to greatly, when I say greatly, I mean it with emphasis, greatly impact your life in terms of your perspective on your reality. Now, there is many things which I have read, there is many things which I have pondered upon, which I have watched, which I have seen people tweet, their perspectives, their ideas. However, this document in and of itself is definitely original in the sense that it takes a completely new aspect, or should I say a completely new view of reality, by combining both the metaphysical and the physical into a coherent image, which just makes sense. And literally, it hurt my brain reading it because I was in such a state of shock pretty much with every paragraph which I read, because it just, it allowed me to create a coherent picture within my mind, which has been able to link together the spiritual aspect of reality and the physical aspect of reality, and it coherently merges them into one. And for the mainstream kind of scientific view, this is the document which allows both to join in together. So I'm not going to speak for much longer because I want to get straight into this. I really want to just dive deep straight into the meat of the podcast. However, I will say that we are going to kind of scan over it. We are not going to read every bit. The kind of idea which I have for this is to pick the paragraphs which I felt have the most or the biggest impact on me, and I've kind of got them prepared in terms of I remember the numbers of which paragraph they was, and I might read those certain paragraphs back to you, or I might just read a small bit, and then I'm just going to kind of let myself flow. I'm going to give my explanation on top of it. I may pop over again to Paint or on the computer obviously, to help illustrate some points which I'm trying to make, but I'm just going to kind of run with the flow. I don't have a clue how long this is going to take. However, I could imagine it being a pretty long one, because it isn't a short document either, and I kind of want to see if we can get at least the majority of the way through, but I'm going to kind of assess it as we go along. And then at the end, I want to take you back to a book which is going to basically take the entire document, and then the book will show you a means of incorporating the entire document into your life. And it is one of my most favorited impactful books which I've ever read, and I have mentioned it in one of my previous podcasts. However, I will obviously bring it up again here at the end for you guys so that you know what's happening. Why don't we just get straight into it? Really short, quick disclaimer, because it's necessary always when we're talking about this raw reality. I just deem it to be necessary. So really quickly, I'm not going to go deep into this. All views are my own. It goes without saying. Please, if you don't agree with anything I'm saying in terms of my explanations, in terms of my perspective on reality, then By all means, you are entitled to your own opinion. Please leave your opinion down in the comments. Please let me know in any areas which I may need to brush up my knowledge on. However, I'm not doing it to annoy you. I'm not doing it to frustrate you. This is just simply my perspective. Raw truth. Truth does not care about your feelings. This is very important for this podcast, as what we're about to see has the potential to greatly impact your view on reality, as it goes deep into the absolute deepest depths of the deep depths of the ocean. So yeah, be prepared. If you haven't brushed up on, I would say, I guess, kind of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, the idea of the absolutely infinite reality, then you're going to be in for a shock here. I will quickly also add here, if you haven't watched my previous podcast, then they will massively help in your understanding for this one. So if you are listening and this is your first time listening to just any of my podcasts, then make sure to potentially pause it here and go back and watch all the previous ones up to this point, as it will definitely broaden your understanding of the information contained within. And then take what is beneficial for your spiritual growth and discard of the rest. With the information contained within this document, I basically just want you to take from it what will help, and then just discard of the rest, because it will be a lot to take in, it will be a lot to consume, and it's almost like eating a massive pizza. Sometimes you don't need those last 3 or 4 slices, but you just eat it anyway, and then you just feel like crap after. So maybe listen to the first 30 minutes, and then if this is, which I would deem it to be, longer than 30 minutes, and then obviously take a break. Maybe give yourself a few days to digest the info and then come back to it at a later date, so you don't eat the pizza all in one. But basically, I am going to leave that there, and we are going to go straight into it. So, my friends, may I quickly add, because I forgot to put it in the disclaimer before, please consult expert advice before attempting any of the material contained within the video. That goes without saying. Everything that I'm going to explain to you from here on out, please make sure that you consult an expert before going and attempting any of this, as I am not that expert and I'm only presenting the information to you, but it is down to your own responsibility to consult the right people and the right training and the full knowledge before you go and attempt any of this. So let's actually now get into it. This is the document. So it's a CIA document. It was released in the 9th of June 1983. Now, if you have watched my previous podcast, you will know how much we have been conspired against, and that they have had access to technologies that we didn't even know was possible 100 years ago. So yeah, it is surprising that this was wrote in 1983, but with the information we now know, it's also not very surprising. And the subject of the document is analysis and assessment of the Gateway Process to Commander U.S. Army Operational Group Fort Meade MD 55. Now, I quickly want to pop over here to my Instagram so you can see, if this works, or it does, that I basically printed this out and read it, because when I initially saw it, I was like, wow, this is going to be interesting. Like, I want this to for sure be in paper form. Like, I want to be able to keep this if it ever gets taken down, etc. So as you can see, the reason why I'm showing you this is because the paragraphs which I have circled in this are going to be the ones that we touch upon, because I want you to kind of get the best knowledge out of the entire document. And the ones which I took the pictures of was the ones which kind of blew me away the most. So as you can see here, I'm just going to kind of let this story run, and if you want to pause and just kind of get a little bit more info here, but yeah, we're going to stick to the main serious deep parts of the document so that we don't spend too long on it. And yeah, it's going to be fun. It is definitely going to be a journey for both me and you, because I'm going to try and learn as we go through this. I'm just going to literally let this play out so you can see the numbers which we're going to kind of focus on. And also, if you don't follow me on Instagram, make sure you head over there, because I'm always putting up stories of everything I read, everything I watch, listen to, all my thoughts, and obviously just the memes. Oh, here we go. And here is the book, which we're going to go into at the end, and I'm going to explain, obviously. So yeah, let's do this. So I just quickly want to start here reading number 1, just to give you guys an understanding of the document, and then I'm going to kind of hopefully explain to you as we go along. You tasked me to provide an assessment of the gateway experience in terms of its mechanics and ultimate practicality. As I set out to fulfill that task, it soon became clear that in order to assess the validity and practicality of the process, I needed to do enough support research and analysis to fully understand how and why the process works. Frankly, sir, that proved to be an extremely involved and difficult business. Initially, based on the conversations with physicians who took the gateway training with me, I had recourse to the biomedical models developed by Itzhak Bentov to obtain information concerning the physical aspects of the process. Then I found it necessary to delve deep into the various sources for information concerning quantum mechanics in order to be able to describe the nature and functioning of human consciousness. I had to be able to construct a scientifically valid and reasonably lucid model of how consciousness functions under the influence of the brain hemisphere synchronization technique employed by the gateway. Once this was done, the next step involved recourse to theoretical physics in order to explain the character of the time-space dimension and the means by which expanded human consciousness transcends it in achieving gateway objectives. Finally, I again found it necessary to use physics to bring the whole phenomenon of the out-of-body states into the language of physical science, to remove the stigma of its occult connotations and put it into a frame of reference suited to objective assessment. Now, if that doesn't sound super interesting to you, I don't know what does. Because, yeah, it is interesting. So, the gateway is basically a way of terming the experience of traveling out your body and through dimensions. So you may have heard it as the Stargate process, which I mentioned in my previous episode, and it's the idea of being able to basically ascend into your light body and travel interdimensionally to different aspects of reality, because our physical reality is contained within the absolute reality, which is infinite in its entirety, and within that infinite dimension exist, and it is a document to describe how to not only access those dimensions and to travel yourself, but also to understand the process and what's happening within consciousness, so that you have a greater understanding of the limitlessness of reality itself, effectively. So yeah, okay, so the first paragraph I want to go on to now, I'm going to link this down below so that you can go and obviously read it yourself, because I mean, every single paragraph and word is just amazing, really. Is the least I can say for it, but we don't have time, unfortunately, to go through and read the entire thing. Otherwise, we would be here for ages and ages and ages. However, I want to start off here, number 5. So I'm going to read it to you. I may stop in between. However, I am going to potentially read the whole thing, and then I'm going to give you my description of it after. So, gateway and hemi-sync. Now that we have briefly profiled the basic mechanics of the principal techniques for altering or expanding consciousness, which share some of the objectives and or methods employed in the gateway experience, we may proceed to focus on what the technique actually involves. Fundamentally, the gateway experience is a training system designed to bring enhanced strength, focus and coherence to the amplitude and frequency of brainwave output between the left and right hemispheres, so as to alter consciousness, moving it outside the physical sphere so as to ultimately escape even the restrictions of time and space. The participant then gains access to the various levels of intuitive knowledge which the universe offers. So what I want to touch upon here quickly before we go on is the idea of time and space. And what is time and space? So we talk about the time-space dimension. Now, time is contained within space, okay? So space is infinite in its entirety. There is no limit to space. Yet, time is the recorder of movement through that space. So you could say time is the recorder of energy, in the sense that energy is movement in itself. And you could have the idea of space as being the foundation of which infinite creative energy lies. Yet space is completely unborn in its nature. It is stillness, it is presence, it is beingness, and it is infinitely intelligent. And it is the infinite space which gives rise to the movement, which gives rise to the energy, which you could also deem the spirit, the intelligence. And then time is a concept which allows us to be able to compartmentalize that movement into certain places within the space and points within the space, and for you to be able to deem one of those points in the present moment. Okay, so I hope that kind of makes sense. And it is that dimension which is the dimension within which we all know and live currently. Yet this document is going to change that. What differentiates the gateway experience from forms of meditation is the use of the hemi-sync technique, which is defined in a monograph by the Monroe Institute trainer Melissa Yeager as a state of consciousness defined when the EEG patterns of both hemispheres are simultaneously equal in amplitude and frequency. Although hemi-sync seems to be rather rare and of only a short duration in ordinary human consciousness, Melissa Yeager states that audio techniques developed by Bob Monroe can include and sustain hemi-sync with the Institute's basic focus-free tapes. She also notes that studies conducted by Elmer and Alice Green at the Menninger Foundation have shown that a subject with 20 years of training in Zen meditation could consistently establish hemi-sync at will, sustaining it for over 15 minutes. We're going to quickly brush through. In our studies of the effects of the Monroe tape system on brainwaves, we have found that the tapes encourage the focusing of brain energy into a narrower and narrower frequency band. This focusing of energy is not unlike the yoga concept of one-pointedness, which we may translate in Western terms as single-mindedness. To observe that the individual gets into the tapes beyond focus free, there is a gradual increase in brainwave size, which is a measure of brain energy and power. So what I want you to understand here, the reason why this is here, is the idea that this is the meditative state. What you're doing in meditation is you're bringing your consciousness into a one-pointedness, and in that one-pointedness you are basically vibrating at a faster and faster frequency, and you are becoming closer to the stillness of infinity and the infinite energy field, which gives rise to all energy itself, which goes all the way to matter, the innate matter, you could say, which is the slowest of vibrations. So you are moving further away from matter and you're moving closer to the infinite light energy, effectively. So the idea with all of this is that this entire document is contained within your mind, in the sense that what you're about to learn is all contained within the infinite being that you are. And to experience it, it is a practice of meditation which allows you to get into a state of stillness, which creates a coherent frequency in both hemispheres of your mind. And in doing so, you raise your vibrational frequency, you increase your energetic potential, and that allows you to then create a light body effectively, and then gives you the ability, obviously once you know how, to be able to then travel through dimensions, certain dimensions which exist out of this time-space dimension at will. Okay, keep going. We're going to move on to this one. Number 7, frequency following response. To achieve synchronization of the brain hemispheres, the hemisync techniques takes advantage of a phenomenon known as the frequency following response, which means that if a subject hears a sound produced at a frequency which emulates one of those associated with the operation of the human brain, the brain will try to mimic the same frequency pattern by adjusting its brainwave output. Therefore, if the subject is in a fully awake state but hears sound frequencies which approximates brainwave output at the theta level, the subject's brain will endeavour to alter its brainwave pattern from the normal beta to theta level. So your mind is always striving for coherence, and this is what nature does. It's balance, it's equilibrium. Nature is always striving for balance. There is always the rise and the fall. There is the day and the night. There is the high and the low. It is always looking to find that center, that coherence, and that also goes on within you, with whether you realize it or not. Always, at every moment in your life, you are simply striving for coherence. So what it is saying in this paragraph is, by simply giving the mind a frequency to hear, which emulates a certain energy band, your mind, when hearing it, is automatically going to try and adjust to that frequency. So this is the role which certain binaural beats can play in helping your meditative states, because if you're playing one which raises your frequency, then as you're meditating, your mind's going to try and adjust to that frequency, and it's going to aid you in creating coherence between the sound and your mind. Since the theta levels is associated with sleep, the subject concerned may progress from a fully awake to a sleep state, provided that he does not consciously resist, as the brain strives to entrain its wave frequency output with the one which the person hears. Since these brainwave frequencies are outside the spectrum of sounds which can be heard in pure form by the human ear, hemisync must produce them based on another phenomenon known as the brain's capacity for deducing beat frequencies. If the human brain is exposed to one frequency in the left ear, which is 10 Hz below another audio frequency played in the right ear, rather than hearing either of the two audible frequencies, the brain chooses to hear the difference between them, the beat frequency, thus availing itself of the FFR phenomenon and using the technique of beat frequencies. The gateway system uses hemisync and other audio techniques employing the FFR phenomenon to introduce a variety of frequencies which are played at virtually subliminally, marginally audible level. The objective is to relax the left hemisphere of the brain, place the physical body in a virtual sleep state, and bring the left and right hemisphere into coherence under conditions designed to promote the production of ever higher amplitude and frequency of brainwave output. Audible and perhaps subliminal suggestions by Bob Monroe, accompanied by the various brainwave frequencies, which are sometimes rolled in together with other sounds such as sea surf to mask the sound frequencies where desirable. So as you can see, this picture is now making sense. So the idea with the beat frequency is to basically silence your left hemisphere. Now, your left hemisphere deals with your logical, linear process thinking. So it's the from start to finish, it's the planning, it's the consistent thoughts which arise in your mind with regards to like what you need to do for the day. However, if you are able to quiet that side of your mind, you move into your right side hemisphere, which is to do more with your intuitive knowledge, which is to do more with your ability to think closer to your more spiritual aspect. It's more linked to your kind of interdimensional abilities, I guess you could say. So the idea there is to quieten the left, allow the right side to express itself in its full entirety, and in that way you gain the benefits. Okay, let's keep going. Going on to number 9 now, brain stimulation. Bentos' biomedical model shows that this renaissance is of considerable importance since it is directly transmitted to and impacts upon the brain. The resulting vibration is received and transmitted into the brain itself via the fluid-filled third and left ventricles located above the brainstem. An electromagnetic pulse is then generated which stimulates the brain to raise the amplitude and frequency of the brain output, just as Dr. Temlow observed in his research on the effects of the hemisync tapes. Also, the brain is contained in a tight membrane called the dura, which is in turn cushioned by a thin layer of fluid located between it and the skull. As the coherent resonance produced by the human heart is in a state of profound relaxation reaches the fluid layer surrounding the brain, it sets up a rhythmic pattern in which the brain moves up and down approximately 0.005 to 0.0010 millimeters in a continuous pattern. The self-reinforcing character of resonant behavior accounts for the body's ability to sustain this movement despite the minimal level of energy involved. In this way, the entire body, based on its own micro-motion, functions as tuned with a vibrational system which transfers energy in a range of 6.8 to 7.5 Hz in the Earth's ionospheric sphere cavity, which itself resonates at 7 to 7.5 Hz. So here what you want to try and understand is that your heart, once you get your heart to a state of complete relaxation and you basically go into your heart space in your meditation, into that space of infinite love, you then create coherence within your mind. So the idea with this is to understand that your heart is the primary organ effectively. It is the source and it is not your mind. And as I explained in one of my previous podcasts, 80% of the nerves of the basically information delivery system goes from your heart up to your mind, and only 20% of the nerves go from your mind down to your heart. So your heart is key. Finding peace and balance and love within your heart is key to having clarity of mind. This is occurring at a very long wavelength of about 40,000 kilometers, or just the perimeter of the planet. In other words, the signal from the movement of our bodies will travel around the world in about 1/7 of a second through the electrostatic field in which we are embedded. Such a long wavelength knows no obstacles, and its strength does not attenuate much over large distances. Naturally, it will go through just about anything: metal, concrete, water, and the fields making up our bodies. It is the ideal medium for conveying a telepathic signal. Consequently, the gateway process is designed to rather rapidly induce a state of profound calm within the nervous system and to significantly lower blood pressure, to cause the circulatory system, skeleton, and all other physical organ systems to begin vibrating coherently at approximately 7 to 7.5 cycles per second. The resulting resonance sets up a regular, repetitive sound wave which propagates in consonance with the electrostatic field of the Earth. So the Earth, if you have heard of the frequency, I think it's 7.83 hertz, or it may be 7.23. One of the two is the frequency at which the Earth vibrates, from my understanding. Okay, so the hertz is a signification of the cycles per second. Now, what it's basically saying here is that if you can get your entire body, your entire nervous system and your organ system to calm to the state where you get to that coherent cycle within the Earth. So here it says it's 7.7 to 7.5, and I'm pretty sure it is 7.23. And if you can vibrate at 7.23, what you start doing is your waves of vibration, because everything is vibration, including your body, your mind, and all your organs. If you can get the entirety of you and everything contained within you to vibrate at the same frequency of the Earth, you will basically merge into the Earth. You will lose your physicality and merge into the foundational frequency of the Earth. So that is how you move into that state of energy. So it's your ability to basically become one with the frequency of your creation, of the physicality of creation, and in doing so you be able to move within it and beyond it at will. Hopefully this is still making sense. This is deep, obviously, very deep, and yeah, I can imagine that it's already changing your perspective, because it is genuinely mind-blowing. However, we are now going to move on to the proper info. This is where it starts to get really fun. So I hope you're enjoying it so far. If you are, please remember to make sure to leave a like rating if you have learned anything up until this point, and also to subscribe for much more truth content like this to come. But we are gonna keep on going. Consciousness and energy. Before our explanation can proceed any further, it is essential to define the mechanism by which the human mind exercises the function known as consciousness, and to describe the way in which that consciousness operates to deduce meaning from the stimuli which it receives. To do this, we will first consider the fundamental character of the material world in which we have our physical existence, in order to accurately perceive the raw stuff with which our consciousness must work. The first point which needs to be made is that the two terms matter and energy tend to be misleading if taken to indicate two distinctly different states of existence in the physical world that we know it. Indeed, if the term matter is taken to mean solid substance as opposed to the energy which is understood to mean force of some sort, then the use of the former is entirely misleading. Science now knows that both the electrons which spin in the energy field located around the nucleus of the atom and the nucleus itself are made up of nothing more than oscillating energy grids. Solid matter in the strict construction of the term simply does not exist. Rather, atomic structure is composed of oscillating energy grids surrounded by other oscillating energy grids which orbit at extraordinarily high speeds. In his book Stalking the Wild Pendulum, Zach Bentoff gives the following figures. So what I want you to quickly understand here is that matter is just a term effectively for energy. Yet matter and energy are identical. What you see, if you look at your body now, if you look at your hands, you see that as physical matter, but really if you was to go and deep with a magnifying glass all the way to the atomic structure, you would just see that it's an oscillating energy field. So once you understand that, you realize that the entire spectrum of reality is just energy, and that by getting into this meditative state that we've been talking about, you are just moving up the energy band. You are going into a state of higher frequency, higher energy, and as a benefit of going into that higher energy state, you get to effectively access a wider spectrum of reality, allowing you to travel beyond this physical dimension as we know it. So that is the idea which I want you to kind of get from that. But let's keep going. The energy grid which composes the nucleus of the atom vibrates at approximately 10 to the 22 Hertz, which means 10 followed by 22 zeros. At 70 degrees Fahrenheit, an atom oscillates at the rates of 10 to 15 Hertz. An entire molecule composed of a number of atoms bound together in a single energy field vibrates in a range of 10 to 9 Hertz. A live human cell vibrates at 10 to 3 Hertz. The point to be made here is that the entire human being, brain, consciousness and all that is, like the universe which surrounds him, is nothing more or less than an extraordinarily complex system of energy fields. The so-called states of matter are actually variances in the state of energy, and human consciousness is a function of the interaction of energy in two opposite states, motion versus rest, in a manner described in the following paragraph. So the idea here is that the energy fields have different frequencies. Everything that you see, everything you touch is within its own frequency band, and that's how it has its form and its originality, I guess you could say. And if you can grasp that and you can understand that, and then you can gain the ability at will to be able to consciously choose the frequencies which you vibrate at, it gives you the ability to access the foundation of the entirety of reality. So 14, this is where we're going next, the consciousness matrix. The universe is composed of interacting energy fields, some at rest, some in motion. It is in and of itself one gigantic hologram of unbelievable complexity. According to the theories of Carl Pribram, a neuroscientist at Stanford University, and David Bohm, a physicist at the University of London, the human mind is also a hologram which attunes itself to the universal hologram by the medium of energy exchange, thereby deducing meaning and achieving the state that we call consciousness. So the idea here is that your mind is a receiver and the universe is basically an emitter. And the universe is a giant hologram in itself, and your mind is a hologram in the way that it takes the information from the universal hologram, it takes it within the mind, and then your own mind projects it outwards itself. So this is the way that you create your reality, is this fact that nothing outside isn't first filtered within, and then the picture is then outwardly created. So the idea that you are the creator actually starts to make sense now, if you can understand that concept. And then all the ideas of the law of attraction, the law of free will, everything in the kind of hermetic aspects of reality now just all add up, because you can understand how by literally thinking of something and putting your focus and energy into that, you are vibrating at that frequency and therefore manifesting it within your physical reality. With respect to the states of expanded or altered consciousness such as the gateway uses, the process operates in the following way. As energy passes through various aspects of the universal hologram and is perceived by the electrostatic fields which comprise the human mind, the holographic images being conveyed are projected upon the electrostatic fields of the mind and are perceived or understood to the extent that the electrostatic field is operating at a frequency and an amplitude that can harmonize with and therefore read the energy carrier wave pattern passing through it. Changes in the frequency and amplitude of the electrostatic field which comprise the human mind determines the configuration and hence the character of the holographic energy matrix which the mind projects to interpret meaning directly from the holographic transmissions of the universe. Then, to make sense of what the holographic image is saying to it, the mind proceeds to compare the image just received with itself. Specifically, it does this by comparing the image received with the part of its own hologram which constitutes it's memory. So the idea here is that you have, through your memory, you have a foundation upon which you perceive the world. And the information which the world gives back to you, you are constantly, through your own mind, once it's filtered within, you're comparing it off of that foundation of perspective. So the idea here is that your perspective governs reality in the sense that everything that you then receive is compared within that foundation, that basis that you have within you, stored within you. So it is here through which all of your, I guess you could say, happiness lies, because if your foundation of your perspective is completely skewed, then all the information that comes in is going to be compared with this skewed foundation, and everything is going to look backwards. So this is why getting to the root of the understanding of your being is so important, because then you can get the primary foundation. And would you look at that? Sorry, I've just noticed this. 7.23, that's the hertz that we're talking about. This is just synchronicity there. For those of you who understand the way synchronicity works, there you go. But yeah, sorry, back to what I was saying, and I've completely lost my train of thought. But basically the idea is that you need to develop the truth, I guess you could say, the understanding of truth, so that the information you receive from the world is always coherent, in that it's not being based off of illusion, but it's being based off of fact. Anyway, going to keep on going. By registering differences in geometric form and in energy frequency, the consciousness perceives, Exhibit 2, as psychologist Keith Floyd puts it. Contrary to what everyone knows is so, it may not be the brain that produces consciousness, but rather consciousness that creates the appearance of the brain. So I actually put on my Instagram recently, and this is a quote by Eckhart Tolle, I think, and it is: the brain does not create consciousness, but consciousness created the brain, the most complex physical form on earth, for its expression. So the idea here is that consciousness is the primary field, the absolute infinite intelligent energy, and it is that which gave rise to the brain, and the brain is effectively the most complex organism which was made in signification of the foundation of the infinite energy complex that just is. And it is the brain which is complex enough to be able to understand the infinite energy which the universe is constantly giving to us through our senses. But if you can go within your brain to a point where you can get it to vibrate at a certain frequency, then you can then go beyond it effectively, and then you can utilize the infinite will which exists within your heart and then travel through different dimensions. I hope this is blowing your mind as much as it blew mine. Again, I'm just going to kind of scan through the parts which, I mean, don't get me wrong, they're super interesting, but these are kind of like the main ones which took my eyes. So we're going to move on to number 18 next. Time, space, dimension. This one's fun. This one is interesting for sure. Up to this point, our discussion of the gateway process has been relatively simple and easy to follow. Now the fun begins. I mean, as he says, gateway involves more than just perception of those aspects of the universal hologram which can be assessed in the dimension of the time-space as we know it. To explain why human consciousness can be brought to transcend the limitations of time-space is the next task which must be addressed. To do this, we must first appreciate what time and space is, in order to understand how the dimension they constitute can be transcended. Physicists define time as a measurement of energy or force in motion. In other words, it is a measurement of change. However, in order for energy to be in motion, it must first be limited in some way within the confines of some sort of vibratory pattern so that its confinement gives it the capacity for being contained at a specific location which is distinguishable from another location, space. Energy which is confined is force without limit, without dimension. Energy which is not confined is force without limit, without dimension, without the limits of form. It is infinity, cannot move because there is nothing beyond infinity, and it is therefore outside the dimension of time. It is also beyond space because that concept implies that a specific energy form is limited to a specific location, and it is absent from other locations. But if energy is in a state of infinity, there is no boundaries, no here to differentiate from there, no sense of area. Energy in infinity means energy uniformly extended without limit. It has no beginning, no end, no location. So when I talk about, as you may have heard me talk about quite a lot now in my previous podcast, the idea that you are an infinite being, that infinity exists within infinite space. Now, infinity by its principality means that you can't define it, you can't locate it, because the center of infinity is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. There is nowhere that you can go in infinity. There is no border to it. There is no boundary to it. And the idea is that for reality to manifest itself, it has to be limited, because it has to be within a certain energetic pattern which allows you to distinguish one point from another. So for that to be there, for that to exist, it has to be contained within something which is larger than it, which is infinity, because how else would you contain something that is limited unless it's contained within a limitlessness? So the same principle is with you, that you are contained within this world of limiting beliefs, limiting aspects, limiting dimensions, but within you, you can go into that state of infinity where there is no boundaries, there is no limitation, there is nothing but pure creative potential, pure creative energy. And it is time, which is the concept which records the limited dimension, the movement of energy, of matter, of change from one place to another. But remember, you can only record that which is limited by itself, yet you are unlimited in your nature. It is conscious force, the fundamental primal power of existence without form, a state of infinite being. Energy in infinity is said to be completely at rest and therefore cannot generate holograms so as long as it remains utterly inactive. It retains its inherent capacity for consciousness in that it can receive and passively perceive holograms generated by energy in motion out of the various dimensions which make up the created universe, but it cannot be perceived by consciousness operating in the active universe. Energy in a state of inactive infinity is termed by physicists as energy in the absolute state, or simply the absolute. Between the absolute and the material universe is which we experience our physical existence, and varying intervening dimensions to which human consciousness in altered states of being may gain access. Theoretically, human consciousness may continue to expand the horizons of its perceptual capabilities until it reaches the dimension of the absolute, at which point perception stops because the absolute generates no holograms of or about itself. So if you look into any traditions across the entirety of ancient history, what do they all resort to? What do they all talk about? And it is the idea of self, the absolute, the infinity, the higher self, the eternal, the ineffable. It is all of those states, and what we have seen here is how physics can include that. You are created from this infinite field of energy, and you have come into this limited field of energy, and there is an infinite amount of dimensions that exist in between this limited dimension and the absolute, because the absolute is infinite. So why would it only be able to contain one, which is the primary foundation of this physical universe? Why wouldn't it be able to attain infinite dimensions all the way in between? And by going into that state in meditation, you gain access to these places within your being, because you are infinite at your root. And it is the absolute sphere, the infinite energy potential, which we are all striving for, which is inevitably where we're all going to return into that fundamental state of infinite rest and eternity. And that's the idea here. So hopefully that is making sense. Again, guys, if you are loving this so far, if you are finding this valuable and interesting, please make sure to leave a like on the video if you are enjoying it, and also to make sure that you subscribe, because you just should. No, I'm joking, but yeah, if you are enjoying it, please subscribe. Intervening dimensions. Since the absolute is conscious energy in infinity, i.e. without boundaries, it occupies every dimension to include the time-space dimension in which we have our physical existence, but we cannot perceive it. It overlays everything, as do many of the intervening gradients or dimensions through which the energies of the universe pass on their way to and from their home in the state of infinity, the absolute. To enter these intervening dimensions, human consciousness must force with such intense coherence that the frequency of the human consciousness must focus, the frequency of the energy pattern which comprises that consciousness, i.e. the brainwave output, can accelerate, so raising your frequency to the point where the resulting frequency pattern is displayed on the oscilloscope, would look virtually like a solid line. Achievement of this state of altered consciousness sets the stage for perception of non-time-space dimensions because of the operation of the principle in physics known as the Planck's distance. Now, I want to quickly see if I can bring up a picture here to help you understand it, which I can. So this is from the book Becoming Supernatural by Joe Dispenza. So if I quickly read over this part here, human conscious energy pattern can accelerate to the point, if displayed, would look virtually like a solid line. Okay, so the idea here is, as you can see here, from thought to energy to matter. So matter, the slowest of frequency, so you can see the frequencies rising here. And then what in the book Joe Dispenza talks about is the unified field, he calls it, which is the absolute, the infinite field. And as you can see here, conscious wholeness, virtually the vibration goes to a straight line, because there is no movement, it's pure stillness, but it's the infinite energy field. And then from there, if we go in the reverse, is how energy, speed of light patterns form matter, slowest. And then you can see how your emotions, how they relate to certain frequency bands, and that by raising your frequency, your consciousness, you actually gain closer to the absolute. And then the same you can see here. This is from the book Healing and Recovery by David R. Hawkins. The same process, just in a different idea. You can see the relative power of consciousness and how to raise your consciousness, the emotions regarded with each, and the process of doing so. And yeah, again, the self enlightenment, highest. So again, that's talking about pure consciousness, ineffable, absolute, the absolute sphere. So let's keep going. This is an aspect of quantum mechanics which applies to the fact that any oscillating frequency, such as the brainwave, reaches 2 points of complete rest which constitute the boundaries of each individual oscillation, movement up or down. With these points of rest, an oscillating wave pattern would be impossible, since the points of rest are required to permit the energy to change direction and thus continue vibrating between the rigid limits. But it's also true that when, for an infinitesimally brief instant, that energy reaches one of its 2 points of rest, it clicks out of time space and joins infinity. That critical step of time space occurs when the speed of oscillation drops below 10 to minus 33 centimeters per second, Planck's distance. To use the words of Bentov, quantum mechanics tells us that when the distance goes below Planck's distance, which is 10 to minus 33 centimeters, we enter in effect a new world. To return to our case in point, the human consciousness wave pattern reaches such a high frequency that the pattern of clickouts comes so close together that there is virtually continuity in it. Then, a portion of that consciousness is actually postulated to establish and maintain its information collection function in those dimensions located between time, space and the absolute. Thus, as almost continuous click-out patterns establish itself in a continuous phase at speeds below Planck's distance, but therefore reaching a state of total rest, human consciousness passes through the looking glass of time-space after the fashion of Alice beginning her journey into Wonderland. So what it is saying here is that if I bring this up here, if we take you here, let's say if you're vibrating at power and will, so the idea is that you are in a state of mind where you are just thinking like, I'm going to create today, I am going to get up and I'm going to do X, Y and Z. If you're in that kind of state of mind, you are effectively vibrating here. And the idea is that every time you get to this point in your pattern of the frequency which you'll be emitting at, this is a state of rest, okay? This very point here, for a momentary point, this is a state of rest. And then you can see the waves are movement. So in the waves you're moving, and here you are at rest. Now, I'm pretty sure 12 to 14 times a second, yes, every second, you move into this place of rest. Now, it happens so quick and so fast that you don't even know it's happening, because how could you? It's happening too quick. And the point which is trying to make in the previous paragraph is that once you raise your frequency to a point close enough to the absolute, what he deems the click out phases, which is the phases of rest which are outside of our time space dimension, you basically vibrate so fast that those click out points of rest become constant. So you effectively move from becoming anything, or another way of putting it actually is, you effectively become stillness. You move the movement into the stillness band in its completeness. Then that allows you to access the infinite band, and in that infinity you then have the ability to infinite dimensions, which allows you to not only travel out of the time-space dimension, but also travel into any dimension you like using your conscious will. That is, if you have enough skill and knowledge to be able to create and be able to focus your mind to a particular place within the infinite space to actually access that particular dimension. So let's keep on going. So as you can see here, the absolute in infinity. So you are oscillating. If you imagine this is your wave of vibration, which you're always vibrating at. The movement stage is here, okay? And the rest stages are here, as I've just kind of said. And the Planck's distance is here, 10 to the minus 33. So underneath, this is our portion of oscillating energy. So this is time space here, between here and here. And outside here, so below 10 to the minus 33, is what he terms as the click out. So the portion at which you merge into infinity. Now this is happening, as I just said, I think 12 to 14 times a second. However, if you can raise your vibrational frequency, so that you are contained within this band and you never move within the time-space band, you are contained within infinity and you move outside of this dimension. And if you can raise your frequency enough to be able to access this state consciously, done through meditation, through stilling your mind, through going into your heart space, into that space of love, and with intense focus, you can then exist in the place of infinity at which you have access to unlimited dimensions. And then if you have the knowledge and the ability, you can then create an entire dimension at will through your imagination, and if you can focus enough energy to it, you can effectively materialize it, and it is in that way that you can then access these realms. So the idea here with, say, psychedelics, for example, is what they are doing is they are changing the frequency of your mind so that you move into this space here, and this is when you can then travel to dimensions where other entities live. And this is why you hear in certain psychedelic trips that people have conversations with these elf-like entities, say for example with DMT and ayahuasca and the different spirits, etc., because they are living in this infinite frequency band in their own dimensions, which exist out of our time space. I hope I'm blowing your mind here. I hope I am giving you enough information so that this is actually making sense. But yeah, honestly guys, when I was first reading this, it was truly mind-blowing. So we are nearly there. We're going to read a few more paragraphs, I think, and hopefully this has been enjoyable for you. So we're going to come to here, 22 now. Although human consciousness can, with enough practice, move beyond the dimension of time-space and interface with other energy systems in other dimensions, the entire process is appreciably enhanced if that consciousness can be detached in large measure from the physical body before such interface is attempted. Once the individual becomes proficient in the technique of outer body movement and then reaches the point where he is able to break out of time-space while out of his body, he gains the advantage of clicking out, the state of rest, infinity, part of his enhanced consciousness while starting from a base located much closer to the dimensions with which he wishes to communicate. So here, the idea here is that consciousness can be detached in large measure from physical body. So what in all different cultures, ancient cultures, especially Zen Buddhism, talks about is the idea that becoming detached from your reality. And in the yoga Sanskrit texts, they basically say that the final step to achieving enlightenment is to give up the world in its entirety, give up everything in the world. So what keeps you in this physical realm, in this limited realm, is your perspective that it is all that there is, and in doing so you grip here. So if you was to go into a meditative state and you was to have if even a particle in your body is left that is fearful of losing everything that you have in this world, then you will not be able to access this infinite consciousness, because you are gripping. It's like you are holding on to this world. So that is the idea here. In other words, since he is starting from a point much higher up, choose the analogy from the time-space concept, the part of his consciousness involved in clicking out will have that much more time to interact in dimensions beyond time-space, because less time is required to transfer the intervening layers. Moreover, once the individual is able to protect his consciousness beyond time-space, that consciousness would logically tend to entrain its frequency output with the new energy environment to which it is exposed, therein greatly enhancing the extent to which the individual's altered consciousness may further be modified to achieve much heightened point of focus and much refined oscillating pattern. So I want to touch on this part here. Much more time to interact in the dimensions between time space. So in infinite space, time doesn't exist, right? Because movement doesn't exist, it's still. So time is the recorder of movement, if you remember me saying. So it is the recorder of going from one point in space to another. But if you are existing in infinite space, then you can't travel from one point to another because it's infinite. Every point is the same as every other. Every point is contained within the center. So if there is no time contained within it, it is eternal. That is the idea of the absolute being eternity. And a great way of understanding this, a great movie I should say, is the movie Inception, where when they travel into deeper layers of the subject's mind, they have more time, because you're going deeper into infinity, deeper into the dream states, which means that you are going into a higher energy state where you are existing closer to the infinite, which means that you have more time in those states because there is less time there. If you are in moving closer to the infinite field, you can travel between spaces at such a faster rate that there is less time, to the point where virtually no time is used if you can get into the absolute state. So that's how that basically time dilation, I guess you could say, works, where in the movie, if you remember, when they're falling in the car into the river, or the van, sorry, that they start the fall effectively near the start of the dream, but once they go into 3 layers deep, they just have a ridiculous amount of time because of the way time dilates with that. The tentative conclusion to be drawn is that the outer body state may be regarded as an extremely effective way of accelerating the process of enhancing consciousness and of interacting with dimensions beyond time-space. If the practitioner of the gateway technique has a choice of concentrating on achieving and exploiting the outer body experience, as opposed to concentrating his full efforts on expanding his consciousness exclusively from a physical base, the former would appear to promise much faster and more impressive success than does the latter. So the idea here is that by gaining access to these dimensions, by being able to raise your frequency, you then have access to a vast and infinite amount of information, and in doing so, your consciousness yourself then has the ability to attain this knowledge, and in that you can then continue to raise your vibrational frequency on and on and on until you reach your goal of the absolute, because you are just an atom of consciousness, and you started out in your evolution of consciousness in your complete state of rest in terms of the absolute state. Then that absolute state manifested upon itself. It then grew to then become to the point of humanity where it was able to be aware of itself, and now your journey from here on out is to be able to return back to that infinite state. So then everything contained within the universe and the universes of universes, once they then return to the state of infinity, the infinite now knows of itself. So that is the idea from which I see the purpose of all life, in which everything is striving to. So you can see here a photograph of a quasar emitting jet of matter. So that is just basically an infinite light potential there, and then what it does is it spits out a jet of matter, and you could imagine that as being what we deem the Big Bang, and our spitting out matter being our universe. And you can see how there could just be infinite universes manifesting at every moment. And then you can see here, this is the black hole. So this is a nucleus where the center resides, effectively the absolute, and then the white hole side of it spits out, and then we start our journey through time space and through the gravity of the nucleus, all time space. So this is where all galaxies are contained within our universe. They then end up like spitting out water. It ends up looping round, going back down, and then inevitably falling back into a black hole where it returns again with the absolute. Now this process takes billions, if not trillions of years, and the idea is that when consciousness starts here, it then starts to come to know of itself, say humanity, and then you evolve to be able to get to the point where you are able to become the whole thing, so that you have full access. And then I guess by here you are basically, you have traveled the entire expanse of the universe. Stylized rendition of a simple torus, as you can see there. Right, so we're nearly there. think we're going to go maybe 2 more paragraphs. We noted earlier that the outer body state involves projection of a major portion of the energy pattern that represents human consciousness, so that it may move either freely throughout the terrestrial sphere for purpose of information acquisition, or into other dimensions outside of time-space, perhaps to interact with other forms of consciousness within the universe. Consciousness is the organizing and sustaining principle that provides the impetus and guidance to bring and keep energy in motion within a given set of parameters, so that the specific reality will result, i.e. the universe, the infinite energy, attaining information. When consciousness reaches a state of sophistication in which it can perceive itself, its own hologram, it reaches the point of self-cognition. Human beings have this form of elevated consciousness, as does the absolute, but in the case of the latter, it is a function of energy and the associated quality of consciousness in infinity, omniscient and omnipotent in perceptual unity. When energy returns to a state of total rest within the absolute, it returns to the continuum of consciousness in the pool of limitlessness, timelessness, perception that resides there. Thus, the more complex an energy system in the material state, the more consciousness it possesses to maintain its reality. Our consciousness, therefore, is that differentiated aspect of the universal consciousness which resides within the absolute. It accounts for the organization of energy patterns which constitute our physical body, but is distinctly separate and superior from it. Since consciousness exists quite apart from the outside of reality, beyond the bounds of time-space, it is like the absolute has neither beginning nor end. Reality has both a beginning and an end because it is bounded within time-space, but the fundamental quantum of energy and its associated consciousness is eternal. When reality ends, it constitutes energy simply returns to the infinity in the absolute, as we was talking about here. So the idea here is that the absolute gives birth to the material state, and our consciousness now as a human is at that very gateway between materiality and infinity, and that in this very life, if you can come to experience infinity through everything we've just talked about, you can then not only get access to the entire universe, you can then not only get access to an infinite amount of dimensions within you, but you return to that state of infinite peace, bliss, tranquility and love, and you receive the eternal life, which is effectively enlightenment in itself, which is what all mythologies and all traditions and all ancient cultures talk about. So again, you can see here, so our galaxy here, galactic south, galactic north. So you can see here white hole. So what is so interesting here is that if this is where our galaxy is contained within our universe, then we still have this entirety of time before we fall back into the black hole, the space of absolute. So just think about, if you can gain access to the absolute here, you'll be able to travel this entire thing. Like, you have eternity to be able to do that, because eternal time exists here, because time doesn't exist where space doesn't. So you will be able to travel the entire thing. It's just absolutely mind-blowing. So I just want to quickly go to this one. This is pretty much the last paragraph which we're going to touch upon. Problem solving. This technique involves identifying fundamental problems with the individual wishes to be solved, filling his expanded awareness with the perception of these problems, and then projecting it out into the universe. In this way, the individual enlists the assistance of what the Monroe Institute calls his higher self, in other words, his expanded consciousness, to interact with the universal hologram to obtain information required to solve the problem. This approach may be used to solve personal difficulties, technical problems in the realm of physics, mathematics, etc., and so on. So the idea here, the higher self, is basically you being able to access an expanded awareness state within your own being that goes beyond the frequency of time space. You then, by doing so, get access to the entire thing. So if this is time here, and then time continues as we move along here, for beings who are already at this state here, which potentially is tens of millions, if not even billions of years ahead of us, then if you can go out of your dimension here and you can travel where you become the whole thing, you can then get access to the knowledge which is contained here, and then if you can bring that back to here, you can then utilize it for your own development and growth here, so that you then get access to the entire thing, and then you are not subject to, say, for example, the evil powers which have ruled our world for eternity. So guys, I think for that there has been enough information contained. I'm not going to read these, but the idea is travel into the past, travel into the future. So this is where the outer body movements, this is where you hear about beings, whether you call them clairvoyants, etc., who are able to channel people, past beings, entities, and they say that they can travel into the past and the future. So the idea here, obviously if you want to pause it or go and read this all yourself, is that if you can get to a state where you are as close as you can be to infinity, you basically get access to the entirety of time, of both the past and the future, and in your light body you can travel to any of those places, and by doing so you can access the information of the entire universe and universes of universes. And that is how clairvoyants work, is that they're able to access that dimension within them. They're able to calm down their mind and focus their energy with such intensity on a specific space in time, and they can actually travel there in their light body. But yeah, we are going to leave it there. Like I said, if this has been interesting, I'm going to leave this down in the description below. Go read, because I've just touched upon very small aspects, but hopefully by what I have explained to you here, the understanding of what this all means, because it is quite technical in itself. So hopefully now if you go and read it, you're going to have a better understanding, a better base from where to see it, and then now as you read it, it's going to make a lot more sense, and you're just going to derive so much benefit from it. What I quickly want to do is bring this up here. This is, so when I talk about your light body, this is effectively your light body. So as you can see, you have the torus here, you have your aura, the white there, and you have a torus go to your feet. You have the star tetrahedron, which is called your Merkaba field, and then you have the atomic field around that, and then you have the final energy pattern, with which all your information is contained in. So if you can consciously travel into this, as you can see here, this is almost acting like a universe, an energetic pattern within itself. So if you can create and access this, all of your memory and all of your information is contained. So if you can stall your body, you can utilize this light body to be able to travel to any point in the universe at the speed of light, so instantaneously, effectively, at the speed and beyond the speed of light. And this is what, from what I understand, where the Palladians live, within their light bodies. They don't even really have physical bodies, and that's what allows them to transverse the whole universe. And it is within this light body where you can then, where it effectively is a stargate itself, but this is where you would then be able to get access to all the Earth's stargates and literally just walk through walls effectively, and yeah, just be able to travel through any dimension you like. I'm not gonna read this, but I thought I'd bring it up now if you want to pause it so you can get a better understanding of what dimensions are. And then this is a great depiction of where we are all heading. But like I said, to finish, I basically want to bring up that book which I was talking about. And the book here is called Reality Transurfing. Now, if you heard, I can't remember which podcast it was. It may have been the first one. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I said about the book Reality Transurfing by Vadim Zealand. And this was the book which was given to me, as I'm sure, as some sort of calling from whatever being you want to call it, whether it be my higher self, which effectively put it in my lap. And this was a book which set me on my path to truth. This was the book which took me from sleeping to waking. It was everything which allowed me to be able to see the world as it is. And I'm not going to read through this, but I brought it up so that you can pause and read it. And then obviously if you like the sound, this is just the introduction of the book. It is basically a method of controlling your reality where the potential of alternatives is infinite, and by having this perspective on your reality without having to change anything about yourself, you can gain access to this infinite realm, and you can materialize sectors of the alternative space at will. So if you remember in the document, it talks about how everything is energy, and how that by just focusing your full energy you can travel to certain dimensions, and you can actually materialize certain aspects of this time-space dimension. This book here is like an instruction manual to do so. It is the primary concept, I guess you could say, at looking at reality so that you can literally manifest whatever you want. This book did it for me. I can tell you from a place of experience that this works without a shadow of a doubt. The book even says in there the whole way through, it's like, I'm not trying to change your view of reality. All I ask is that you give this a go, and it works. So if you are stuck in a place where you are not liking your job, you are not liking your current whether it be financial situation, your current relationships, your social relationships, just anything in your life, if you want to understand how you can change it without having to change anything about your reality except just your perspective on it, then this is it. And it is literally the complementary factor to everything that we have just talked about. But anyway, people, if you have enjoyed, please, for the third and final time, in the name of Nico Tesla, because he loves freeze, please leave a like if you haven't done so already. I hope you have derived value from this. I put a lot of information into this. I hope my explanations have been clear and helped you develop a picture in your mind of how you are infinite, of how you are an infinite being, and how infinity is contained within you, within that heart space, within that love, that divine love that exists within, and basically how you can still your mind to go into that coherent pattern where you can go and exist within that infinity, within that tranquility, within that bliss, and help co-create the true reality with which the entire universe is striving towards in its return to whence it came, the source. Anyway, that is the end of episode 6. For episode 7, I am completely unsure of what I'm going to be talking about or what I'm going to do. However, I will just let it flow, let it come to me, and we will see. I hope to see you soon. Thank you for all of your support on all of my social medias and the previous podcasts, because the reception that I've had has been insane, especially like the amount of views and likes and comments which I've got has literally been incredible. Make sure that you follow me on Twitter at Reborn13 and Instagram at Reborn13 if you haven't done so already. But yeah, I love you all dearly. May God bless you all in your journeys and everything that you're experiencing in this crazy, amazing time that we're living through. Love and light to all of your hearts, all of your souls, and everyone close around you, and to all of humanity as of that. And I will see you all soon.